Good morning to everyone. On behalf of the Director General, Human Resources, Ministry of the Public Service, and the Director, Learning and Development Directorate, a very warm welcome to all who have joined for this webinar presentation this morning, Eating Healthy on a Budget. My name is Sheila Grisette, Acting Senior Human Resource Officer at the Directorate, and I am your moderator for this morning's presentation. Assisting me is my colleague, Ms. Laura Taylor, Senior Human Resource Officer at the Directorate as well. Most, if not all of us, would agree that health is wealth. So we strive to gain or maintain good physical health and well-being. Could we also agree that adopting healthy eating habits goes a long way in securing this good health, this good physical health and wellness? Well, let us also admit that we may have the desire to eat healthy, but the price of food falling into the healthy category can at times deter us from purchasing. How we strike the balance between eating healthy in a seemingly high-priced, nutritious food market and our disposable income will engage our attention during this webinar presentation this morning. Before I introduce today's presenter, I want to share the rules of engagement for our discussion today. Your cameras and microphones have been disabled for the duration of the session. We want to create an environment where you can reap the full benefits of this webinar. For your part, we encourage you to pause or minimize any distractions and give your full, undivided attention to the presentation. You are invited to participate today in two ways. A few polls have been built into today's presentation to garner your feedback on aspects of this pertinent issue of eating healthy on a budget. Secondly, we encourage you to post any questions you may have in the chat. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer segment. At that time, your question posed in the chat will be relayed to the presenter. As questions occur to you during the presentation, please feel free to post them in the chat. This morning's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available through the Learning and Development Directorate's YouTube channel. At the end of the webinar, we're going to invite your feedback on the presentation. A link to our evaluation form will be posted in the chat. Please look out for it. Our presenter today is Brian Payne, Deputy Nutrition Officer of the National Nutrition Center. He holds Master of Science degrees in Nutrition, Physical Activity and Public Health, and Human Nutrition. As DNO, Brian provides technical assistance to government-run long-term care facilities, inclusive of Dodds Prison and various district hospitals. Currently, he's a fellow with the Eastern Caribbean Health Outcomes Research Network of Yale University. In addition, he sits on the National NCD Commission and holds the position of Deputy Chairperson for the National HIV/AIDS Commission. His academic qualifications and professional experience are testimony to his expertise in the field of nutrition and public health. Colleagues, please listen attentively as Brian shares with us this morning on eating healthy on a budget. Brian, good morning and welcome. I invite you to begin today's presentation.
Good morning, Sheila. You mentioned I have 50 minutes or so, 50 minutes?
Yes, please.
Sure, thank you. Hi, good morning all. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, thanks for the invite, Sheila, and the learning and development community. Again, my name is Brian Payne. I work with the National Nutrition Center. I've worked at several polyclinics over the years. I've been probably there too long. And I also work primarily these days more so in health policy, in the public health space. And also I do a bit of work as it relates to food service, especially in the government-run long-term care facilities and entities like the prison and DODs as well too. So I do a few things, or rather wear a few hats. And for me, I hope that persons here have many questions, so that we could have kind of a robust question and answer segment. I imagine that persons are concerned in terms of the high cost of living. I think as a result of things like the high cost of living, wars, etc., increasing fuel prices, all these things kind of work together to increase inflation. And as inflation increases, obviously, we can imagine that food prices tend to go up. I'm not sure if this is unique to Barbados, but it would appear as though once food prices go up, they don't seem to come back down, regardless of what happens. So, irrespective of the external shocks, food prices tend to go up, and they never ever come back down. Well, again, but there are things that people can do to kind of defer mitigate the cost of mitigate the effect of the high cost of living. So definitely there is scope to still eat healthy, regardless of the price of food. So I'll just jump into the presentation. Just to give you a bit of a summary, we're going to talk about lifestyle behaviors and disease, and these are primarily chronic non-communicable diseases. We're going to touch a bit on the food groups and the nutrients. We're going to talk about this thing, eating within your means. And also we're going to touch a bit on reading food labels. And there are other things which will be in the presentation as well too. So I think we're going to start off here with a poll. And it reads, what do you find most challenging when it comes to eating healthy on a budget? And I think persons would maybe give it a couple of minutes, or a minute or so, to kind of answer the question. So I'll just wait until I think everyone has answered the poll question before I move on.
So we're going to give persons
Sure.
about a minute or so to post their responses to the poll. Okay, we're going to be closing the poll in a few seconds. Are we going to be ending the poll now? All right, I'm going to share the results as well, so you can see for yourself how persons would have responded.
Oh dear, well, limited access to fresh produce. Yeah, I'm not surprised by the responses. And again, it really comes down to the idea of this high cost of healthy food options. I think before I even go any further into the presentation, I just want to say quickly that in terms of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, what we're trying to do anyway. I think years gone by, there was this idea that a person is kind of responsible for their health, and if a person may become diabetic, hypertensive, or have some kind of non-communicable condition, I think people were quick to say, it's the fault of the individual when he becomes ill, and in turn, the individual is responsible for their own health. But I think the narrative or the paradigm has shifted quite a bit. And as you would see, based on some policy initiatives like the Barbados School Nutrition Policy, the ban of smoking in public places, the taxation on tobacco and tobacco products, even things like the sugar sweetened beverage tax. I think what the Ministry of Health and Wellness attempts to do is that they're trying to change the food landscape of Barbados to make the healthy choice the easier choice. And I know some persons may say, well, with the increase in taxes on things like sugar sweetened beverages and other things, we can imagine that is not making the healthy choice easier, but it's just possibly altogether increasing the cost of food or food items on the island. But of course, that's another kind of discussion. But I just wanted to point it out. So the key thing here in terms of health, in terms of our relationship with health and our good health, and it comes down to a number of things: physical activity, nutrition, and managing of things like stress, sleep, relaxation, etc. And all these things kind of work together to increase your risk of things like diabetes, hypertension, some forms of cancer, cardiovascular issues. And these conditions, which are in the red circle, they can be pretty much kind of lumped into non-communicable diseases. And that term basically means that these conditions are not transmissible from person to person. They're more lifestyle related. So by improving your nutrition, and by reducing the levels of excess sugars, fats, sodium as well too, by doing more physical activity, by sleeping better or getting more sleep, reducing your stress levels, these factors can be important in preventing a person from having these actually getting these chronic non-communicable conditions. So these things definitely work together. So in essence, there's no one cause or there's no one reason why a person may become diabetic or hypertensive or develop cancer. There's just a multiplicity of risk factors. And the more risk factors a person may have, the greater the propensity or the greater the risk that a person may have a non-communicable condition or develop it at some point in their life. And the key thing here is that good nutrition begins very early. And some would say good nutrition begins in childhood, but I would say good nutrition even begins before conception. So that's why it's critical for persons who are pregnant or plan to have children. They should pay special attention to the foods they consume, their levels of physical activity, because we find that if a mother or family, if they're not particularly in tune with their health, it can definitely affect the child even before they're born and going forward. But we'll move on. And again, I suspect everyone here knows these things, but we look at the basic food groups. In the Caribbean, they're food from animals, and that speaks for itself. Staples like rice, pasta, ground provisions, bread, biscuits, etc. These foods are generally high in carbohydrates, and the foods from animals are primarily high in protein and fat, but protein tends to be the key thing in it. Of course, the other two food groups are fruits and vegetables, and then we have things like fats and oils. And each particular food group tends to be rich in particular nutrients. Again, the food from animals is rich in things like protein and fat. Foods from animals also are rich in minerals like iron and calcium and copper as well too. The staples tend to be high in carbohydrates. You also get some B vitamins from them as well too, especially staples which are highly refined. Things like the brown rice and the rolled oats, and of course the whole wheat varieties of things like bread and biscuits. They tend to be more nutritious as well. Peas and beans and legumes, again, these are a good source of carbohydrates, a good source of vitamins and minerals, etc. Things like fruits and vegetables, as we all know, fruits and vegetables contain lots of vitamins and minerals. I'll just make a quick point here. Red fruits and vegetables, things like watermelon, tomato, red peppers, carrots will contain some as well too, but the asparagus as well, they contain something called lycopene. And lycopene is very critical in terms of prostate health in men. So an easy intervention, or what I will call a low-hanging fruit for men in terms of maintaining good health, would be to consuming some kind of food which contains lots of lycopene every single day if possible. It is very protective for prostate health. So whether it be things like tomatoes themselves or tomato products, tomato ketchup, even though some tomato ketchup may be high in sugar, but the red peppers, etc. By consuming these, we can get high levels of lycopene, which is protective for men's prostate. So any men in the audience or any females who may have husbands or partners or children, of course, encourage the males to use as much high lycopene foods as possible. And again, these foods are things like tomatoes, red peppers, watermelon, the guavas with the pink flesh as well too. Again, I deal with fats and oils. Fats and oils should definitely be used sparingly, just to kind of, as you can see in the slide here, we have oils, we have butter, we have avocado oil, coconut, of course, the seed oils and the nut oils. Oils are generally high in fat. The plant-based oils tend to be high in unsaturated fats. That's why they're liquid at room temperature. And the animal fats tend to be high in saturated fats. That's why they are solid at room temperature. A particular interest, especially these days, is coconut oil. And I had patients who kind of got into the hype of coconut oil. And by hype, I mean this idea that coconut oil is a healthier alternative to, let's say, a vegetable oil. What I will say about coconut oil is that coconut oil tends to be very high in saturated fats. So therefore, at least the good coconut oil anyway, it tends to be solid at room temperature. And that's the key thing, because of the high level of saturated fats. So therefore, coconut oil will be good for things like baking and frying. Now, on the other hand, again, is coconut oil healthier than a regular vegetable oil? There are two things that people need to consider. And the first consideration is one, based on the high level of saturated fats, if you use any fat in excess, it could definitely affect your cholesterol and other markers of cardiovascular health. That's the key point. And the second point, especially for a discussion like this, is that when you look at the price point for coconut oil, and you see the high price point, I mean, you could probably get maybe like, in some places you can get a liter for 50, 60, 70 plus dollars. So when you think about the potential health benefits versus the cost, I mean, I think for me, again, from a human perspective, not even a nutrition perspective, from a human perspective, we can imagine that based on the high cost of coconut oil, you're not getting good value for money. And that's the key thing. So for me personally, I don't use coconut oil. And if I have any patients that I would see at the polyclinic, I generally don't encourage them to use coconut oil as well either, again, because of the high price point. So therefore, you're not going to necessarily get kind of value for money almost. And that's a key takeaway that I want persons to remember. But I'll be happy to answer any questions about it during the question and answer segment. There's another poll. Sorry, there's another poll.
So we're launching our second poll for the morning. It should appear on your screen soon. Then go ahead and vote. Answers for this poll are coming in fairly speedily. You'll just give it a few more seconds before we close. Okay, and we're going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share the results so that you can see how persons would have answered.
Often, occasionally, always, rarely. Okay, over there, rarely.
We had 46% of persons saying that they currently incorporate affordable, nutritious food into their meals quite often.
Good. So I mean, I'll just continue the presentation. I think again, the poll was quite interesting, and I think the key thing here is that I think a large cross section of persons here try to incorporate affordable, nutritious foods. I mean, in terms of when I think about affordable and nutritious as it relates to food, I think something that comes to mind would be typical things that Bajans generally eat, and it would be in and not only Bajans but also West Indians, but incorporating things, lots of things like peas and beans and legumes into their meals. I know in terms of these, when we do work with, in terms of the school meals department and the work that I do with them, I think they have kind of shifted from using things like when they do things like ground beef, for instance, as opposed to using only ground beef in their meal, they would actually use half ground beef, half lentils, half cooked lentils. And that, even though it may seem like a pretty small, kind of insignificant step, it makes a huge difference in terms of the overall, nutrient quality of the meal. For instance, when they add lentils to the dish, and you remove some of the mince, some of the ground beef, you actually reduce the fat content significantly. You reduce the cholesterol content significantly. You increase the fiber content significantly. Of course, you're going to add some protein. You're going to get other micronutrients like zinc and calcium as well too. So by doing simple things like that, it makes a significant difference in terms of a person's meal. So something like that you can actually adopt at home as well too. Whether you're going to do like a meat-based stew, or even if you're going to use the same ground beef, kind of substituting makes a huge difference, and getting in more peas and beans and nuts and legumes. Again, because the price points for things like peas and beans is definitely significantly lower than, let's say, animal meats and fish and poultry. Very important. Good. And the key thing here, at least in terms of when we prepare meals, and again, this idea of affordability is important. And affordability is relative, but in terms of affordability, the key thing here is that when we do prepare a meal, the meals should be what we say is balanced. And all the term balance means, it means that you're going to consume a wide variety of foods. I think the typical Barbadian on a day-to-day basis, especially if they're going to purchase food away from home and not prepare their own meals, they would tend to have things like the protein or the meat, fish, or poultry, and they have a large serving size of that. And they're also going to have a large serving size of whatever staple it may be. It may be some kind of pasta, macaroni, things like spaghetti or chow mein, potentially ground provisions. But in terms of the fruits and in terms of the vegetable component of the meal, or the fruit and vegetable component of the meal, that's where I think that's where we tend to fall short. I often tell people an appropriate serving size of, let's say, meat, fish, or poultry is roughly about 4 ounces. But the typical or the average Barbadian will actually consume maybe twice or 2.5 times that amount of protein. And of course, not to mention the serving size of the starchy foods, because the typical Barbadian, they're going to want a large serving size of whether it be rice or some kind of pasta as well too. So in essence, as it relates to food, the average Barbadian consumes very large serving sizes of high protein foods, primarily foods from animals, and they consume a large portion size of starch with limited amounts of things like fruits and vegetables on their plate. In essence, the typical Barbadian tends to overeat. And the key thing here is if we can actually incorporate, again, some kind of peas and beans and legumes into some of our meals, that would definitely reduce the price point of the meal and your overall budget. I mean, so again, as I would often tell people when I worked at the clinics more, there's absolutely no reason for you to be having meats, whether it be things like beef, pork, lamb, poultry, or fish, every single day. There's no reason why you can't say to yourself or your family, we're going to have, a no meat day or a couple no meat days, and we're going to have primarily things like peas and beans and legumes as our source of protein. And by doing that, especially if you have young children, and by doing that and kind of incorporating or introducing these quote unquote healthier options within the meal or within their in their meal patterns, that makes a huge difference in terms of their overall health and their overall outlook as it relates to health or their life in general. And another key thing about things like peas, beans, and legumes is that fiber. Fiber is very important. And the average Barbadian does not consume adequate amounts of dietary fiber. And this is very key. And diet high in things like animal foods, the meats, the fish, the meats, especially the red meats, and the processed meats, the beef, the pork, the lamb, the things, the sausages, hot dogs, etc., the pepperoni, etc. So we consume lots of these high-fat animal foods and often the cured animal foods. And then we consume limited amounts of dietary fiber that in itself can actually increase our risk of things like colorectal cancer over time. Because you eat lots of meat and processed meats, it doesn't mean that you will develop some form of cancer or some form of digestive-related cancer, but it means is that your risk is that higher compared to a person who does not consume very high levels. Key thing here, incorporating more animal-based foods in your diet can make a difference in terms of reducing your cost. But the key thing here is that some people may be kind of intimidated because they say, well, I personally cannot prepare some of these foods the way they should be prepared. Or they may say, oh, this thing is going to take too much time to prepare. But the key thing here is that with planning and with planning, incorporating some of these peas and beans and stuff into your diet can make a huge difference. And it can actually also save you some money as well too. And I think that's the key thing here. Another issue that we have, and I see this a lot, especially when I work with children. Another issue that we see is that for some reason, I think the average Barbadian thinks that a lot of the fruits and vegetables which are grown locally are kind of inferior to what would come in from overseas. So they would say things like the strawberries and the blueberries and the blackberries, they are healthier than cherries or West Indian cherries. They're healthier than dunks. They're healthier than akis. So there tends to be this kind of almost kind of a standoffish attitude to foods that are produced, to fruits that are grown locally compared to the stuff which is imported. And if you could, kind of utilize more locally grown seasonal produce, whether it be fruits and vegetables, I think that is very key in terms of, one, saving a bit of money, and also in terms of ensuring you get adequate amounts of vitamins and minerals and dietary fiber in your diet. By, again, using local seasonal produce. And I know, like, sometimes, again, when I worked at the clinic, more people would come to me and they would say, oh, my blood pressure is high, and I'm going to buy, let's say, Christophines, for instance. And the average cost of Christophines, let's say, could be $8, $9, $10 a pound. And then you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense because of the high price point, right? So if you could purchase something which is in season, it's going to be significantly less. Or if you can purchase something which is at a lower price point, it's going to be significantly less as well. Again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't necessarily spend your money on Christophines if you think you have to, but you can definitely get more value for money by buying things which are grown in season. And I think the key takeaway from this in terms of things like fruits and vegetables and purchasing them, I think one of the key takeaways really is, is that different fruits and vegetables have different micro and macronutrient profiles. Basically means different fruits and vegetables contain different vitamins and minerals. And the only way you're going to get kind of a complete representation of all the vitamins and minerals that you need for good health is if you consume a wide variety of foods, a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. So you're not only going to have the strawberries and the blackberries and the blueberries, but you're also going to put in some dunks and some akis, some sea grapes if possible. You're going to get in some bananas, especially if they're locally grown, so that is also very important as well too. And again, it really speaks to this idea of eating local if possible, eating local as much as possible. Again, because based on the price point or the cost to bring in some of these fruits and vegetables from overseas, you can imagine that the price point is going to be high for you as the consumer. And key thing here, some of these same local fruits and vegetables, whether it be things like spinach, whether it be things like Chinese cabbage, broccoli grown locally, some of these same foods can be added. Like you could add things like locally sourced things like kale. You can add those to things like the rice, or you can add those to things like pasta dishes as well too. So it makes a huge difference. Using things like oat flakes and barley and linseed, which generally have a lower price point, they can be good for fortifying things like fruit smoothies, porridges, breads and muffins as well too. So again, so incorporating especially leafy vegetables into the traditional Bajan foods, whether it be rice dishes or pasta dishes, can make a significant difference in terms of the overall nutrient content of the dish. And again, the key thing here I want to stress on, it definitely increases the fiber content of food. I think a question that I used to ask people more is one, is macaroni pie healthy? Again, I guess that's a Bajan pastime, right? And the second question would be, how can you make it healthier? And again, the key thing for me is that one, you're going to, if possible, use less cheese for sure. I think that makes a huge difference. And the second thing, what you can do is you could also add lots of vegetables to the macaroni, whether it be macaroni, whether it be or some other kind of casserole. You can add lots of vegetables to it, and that in itself changes the nutrient content of the particular meal. And of course, one of the key things here is to have a smaller or a more sensible portion size. And by having a smaller, more sensible portion size, definitely you're going to reduce your overall calorie intake, and definitely you're going to reduce the amount of things like fat and cholesterol and sodium you take in. So portion size, again, too, plays an important part. And as you can see, in terms of the second to last bullet point here, it talks about things like tuna, sardines, and mackerel. And canned salmon as well is a good option as well, too. And again, these fish are good sources of protein, calcium, and also they're very good sources of omega-3 fatty acids, which are good for your heart and your cardiovascular health. So by consuming oily fish, sardine, mackerel, salmon, at least 2 to 3 days a week, it can actually give you all the omega-3 fatty acids you require for good heart health. Now, people often say, well, I do not eat canned fish. So I asked them, how are you going to get your omega-3 fatty acids? Especially if you don't consume things like linseed or chia seeds, which are high omega-3s, walnuts, high omega-3 fatty acids too, which are good for your cardiovascular health. So the question is, how are you going to get your omega-3s? And some people may quickly point to taking a supplement. But one, the supplements can be very expensive. So if you can avoid taking a supplement, of course, you don't want to take it at all. And two, sometimes the doses of the particular nutrient in question in some of these supplements is very high. For instance, I remember years ago, I think there were some products on the market, Omega XL, Super Krill Oil, and so those are just some of the ones that I can recall. But the key thing to remember is that things like the omega-3 fatty acids are micronutrients, meaning that they're required in very small doses. So when we take in excess or large volumes of, again, these micronutrients, it can actually increase our risk. So for omega-3s specifically, taking in higher excessive levels of omega-3 fatty acids can actually increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. Taking in the appropriate amount actually reduces the risk, but when we take in excessive amounts, it actually increases our risk of the specific condition. And that's something to remember, because this idea of supplementation, where people think that they need to take a vitamin supplement, or taking a vitamin supplement is important. In specifics, under specific circumstances, yes, I would say it may be important. But the key thing here is that we want to get, if not all, most of our nutrients from food, especially whole foods, because when we get our vitamins and minerals from food, they tend to be more, or the vitamins and the minerals and the antioxidants tend to be more biologically available. And that's the key thing. So the body more readily assimilates them compared to you taking a supplement. And that's a key point to remember. Very key point to remember. Another good thing I guess, once space allows, is that persons can actually grow some of the food that they would consume at home. And it doesn't have to be growing like fruit trees, for instance, where the fruit trees tend to live long, so therefore you want to get fruit. If you plant a fruit tree today, you may get fruits the next 10 years. But by planting crops like the okra, the lettuce, the sweet potato, Chinese cabbage, cucumbers, by planting those things like garlic garlic may be a little tricky, but turmeric and ginger, celery, by planting these things at home, that too can help reduce some of your overall food costs. And if you look at the picture on my right, where a person is planting, I think they have tomatoes planted in some large buckets. So by doing things like that, it can make a huge difference in terms of reducing your food costs. And basically you plant what you like, and if you have a green thumb, you can definitely save quite a bit of money at the supermarket, even by growing things like sweet potatoes, for instance. They are, I've been told, they're relatively easy to grow. And also, again, using things like ginger and turmeric to add to foods definitely increases the overall nutrient content of a particular meal. And definitely those two spices especially promote good health. Now, again, this whole idea of eating well, as I would have mentioned, I think very early in the presentation, eating health or eating well begins very early in childhood. I think what I often try to impress on people is that taste preference develops in children from a very early age, 1, 2, even 3 years old. And the key thing for me is that children tend to model the behavior of their parents or other adults in and around their household. So if it's a situation where a child grows up in a household where things like fruits and vegetables aren't readily consumed, or the order of the day are things like bacon and hot dogs, hamburgers, etc. for breakfast and other meals, what we find is that, again, children tend to gravitate towards these foods. These what we call ultra-processed foods, which are high in salt, fat, and cholesterol. And in some cases, they're also very high in sugar as well, too. But again, based on how parents model healthy behaviors, it really dictates how a child tends to approach eating well. And also physical activity is no different either. If a child grows up in a household where physical activity is emphasized, chances are they are going to be physically active themselves. And that also is very important too. Very important. I think in many families, I think cooking is something that is kind of a forgotten thing. And I think a big part of it too is because of convenience. I know we talk about the cost of so-called healthy foods like the ground provisions and the lean meats and fish and poultry are high. But I mean, I often tell people the cost of fast food or I would say convenience food, the cost of fast food or convenience food is not really that different either, right? I think some of the fast foods or the convenience foods tend to be quite expensive. So don't think that only the healthy foods have a higher price point these days, but also the unhealthy foods tend to be very expensive as well too. And I think a key strategy to kind of almost, especially for persons who may live close to farmers, a key strategy to kind of reduce your overall cost, your overall food cost, will be to buy directly from the farmer or buy directly from the fish market, and kind of cutting out the supermarket or cutting out the middle person will definitely reduce your cost in a significant way as well too. Very important. And I think another key thing here is if you plan your meals effectively, and I know we're all busy as we work, as we work or as we tend to be on this career trajectory, we tend to have less and less time to actually prepare meals. So the key thing here is one, to cook meals in bulk or to pre-cook specific foods to ensure that when you're ready to use them, that these foods are already cooked. So therefore your overall meal preparation time should shrink significantly. And that's important as well too. Whether it is you cook your peas beforehand, or whether it is you chop your vegetables beforehand, or you prepare your salads beforehand. I think so these small things can definitely make a big difference in terms of not only reducing the cost of food, but also reducing the time you may spend in a kitchen setting.
Okay, it's time for our third poll of the morning. You should see it appear on your screen shortly. As soon as it appears, you can go ahead and vote.
This is interesting. How much time do you typically spend planning? Oh, this is interesting.
Okay, the poll results are coming in quite nicely. We're going to give them a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to be closing our poll in a few seconds. Thank you so much for your answers. We're going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share the results.
Oh dear.
So we have, there's a tie for 36% for those who spend less than 15 minutes or 15 to 30 minutes planning for weekly meals. And we have 18% who spend 30 to 60 minutes and just 11% who spend more than 60 minutes planning weekly meals. So we're not that much of planners when it comes to meals.
Yeah, and again, I'm not surprised that most persons they don't spend enough time planning. I wasn't thinking less than 15 minutes. I'm just wondering what these meals might be. But I think the key thing here is that, again, especially if your focus is on having healthier meals and, again, reducing costs, definitely planning is going to play a critical role in saving money and, of course, planning better meals. So you definitely need to spend more time kind of thinking or figuring out what meals you want to have over the course of the next 2 or 3 days. I think for a person, or especially if I have a family, if you go home and say to yourself, "Oh shoot, what am I going to cook?" No, is generally not a good recipe for planning a healthy meal, or even a healthy lifestyle to some extent. So the key thing is that we need to plan more. Plan what we're going to eat, plan what activity we're going to do, whether we're going to prepare in bulk and freeze, but there's definitely significant scope here in this group anyway, to increase the amount of planning you do, so that so that your meals tend to be better quality. Good. Good. So this slide really speaks to managing resources. So manage your resources. I think where possible anyway. I think buying in bulk, whether you buy a large amount of sweet potatoes or potatoes, whether you buy things that when tomato, let's say when tomatoes are cheap or when they're reasonable, you buy them when they're cheap or reasonable, and you can actually puree them, or you can actually freeze them whole, and doing stuff like that significantly reduces significantly reduces the amount of money you spend. And a key thing here too is use local foods. I think this idea of ground provisions, especially because in terms of when I would last check, I think ground provisions are very expensive. Things like sweet potatoes and yams and eddos. So for me, if in February these foods are expensive, I think the quick answer is just don't buy them. Buy them when they're more affordable. And in that case, you would switch to something else. So I think people are under this idea or this perception that sweet potatoes are the healthiest thing, or ground provisions are healthier than that and other staple foods. But again, there are ways that you can increase the nutrient content of things like rice and things like pasta. And when your dish is complete, you may actually have a healthier alternative to the sweet potato or the yam or the eddo, things like breadfruit, as we see depicted here. Again, they tend to be relatively cheap compared to things like sweet potato and yam and eddos and cassava, so they may be an option as well too, so that's important. Using local foods, but again, you want to buy them when they're in season or when the price point is lower, because it doesn't make sense you're going to spend, you're going to buy, just for example, you're going to pay $9 a pound for sweet potatoes. It doesn't make sense. You buy something else. You could probably use some rice, and you could add some peas and beans to your rice, or you could add some kind of leafy vegetables to your rice, and it can be a healthier meal overall. So I don't want persons to go away from here thinking, if they see things like sweet potatoes and those things out of their price range, that they have to buy them to make a healthy meal. I think that's far from the case. So that's why this idea of planning your meals is very important. Is very important as well too. I think for us Barbadians too, when we think about things like lunch and breakfast, I think we have specific things in mind. For instance, I think when most Barbadians, especially when we talk parents, when we talk about things like breakfast, specific things come to mind. And these things are the hot dogs, the hamburgers, the luncheon meat, etc. I think these are the first things that come to mind, are the high sugar breakfast cereals, with the vanilla milk, etc. But in terms of things like and people take lunch, people take macaroni pie, rice, peas, and some kind of meat, But again, but that is not the norm. I think a healthy breakfast can be something as simple as a high fiber cereal, or it can be something as simple as some whole grain or some whole wheat pancakes, for instance. Those things are very important as well too. Very, very important. Very, very important. I think using like whole wheat flour, adding things like oats and flaxseed, adding things like oats and linseed or flaxseed or chia seeds to things like porridges, or even things like cereals, can make a huge difference in terms of the overall nutrient content of meals. And these are simple things. Very, very simple things. Even things like adding like we have like cheese paste, or we have like making some cheese paste, for instance, by adding things like grated carrot to it, that can make a huge difference as well too, as opposed to using the typical as opposed to using the typical burgers primarily made from beef. We can actually use things like peas and beans, to actually make burgers or patties, which would be, again, high in protein, but also very high in fiber as well too. So it's important, to think of these things. And just to touch a bit on this idea of reading food labels, I think I have a bit of time left. To touch on this idea of reading food labels. And again, the key thing when you see a food label, the first thing you're going to look at as is the servings per container. And the typical product or food product generally contains more than one serving. And if a food product contains 3 servings per container, you need to multiply all of the nutrition information by 3 or by 2 or by 4. So the first thing we're going to look for is the serving size. Another key thing we're going to look for is the calories per serving. So, if something contains 100 calories per serving and you consume 2 servings, you're going to get 200 calories. Fat tends to be an important one we look for as well too. And if something contains in the range of more than 20% fat, is generally considered a high fat product. Salt, anything in the range of above 5% can be considered high sodium. And in terms of protein is another key nutrient we look for as well too. And we would want foods or food items which would be high in protein. So anything above 5%, 10% will be considered high in protein as well too. Good. So I am going to, you could easily read this information once the slides are shared. So I'm going to stop here now. I'm going to open the floor to take any questions that may have come up.
Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Okay, persons were posting in the chat fairly early. And you were talking about oil. And you had promised to share a little bit more about oil. Somebody had asked, what about olive oil? And I believe you had said something about coconut oil. Someone had asked, what is good coconut oil?
In terms of coconut oils, again, for me, I think the issue of coconut oil is the price point. And I think, especially, I think in the supermarket, you will see things like extra virgin coconut oil and coconut oil. And I mean, but the price is really the deterrent for me. But if you can't afford it, you'd want to use something which looks kind of solid at room temperature and it has a strong coconut smell. Coconut oil tends to have a high smoke point, and that's why it's good for things like baking and again frying as well too. But the price point tends to be a huge deterrent. Things like olive oil tends to be good because it's high in poly and monounsaturated fats, which are good for the heart and the cardiovascular system. But again, the extra virgin olive oil tends to be very expensive. So for me, unlike coconut oil, olive oil contains lots of poly and monounsaturated fats. So it's not very good for frying. So if you're going to use olive oil, you want to use it in the natural state where possible. And by using it in the natural state, you're going to get all the health benefits. The good olive oil generally comes in a metal container or a dark colored bottle. Again, because the light tends to kind of oxidize these polyunsaturated fats, which may cause problems, which may reduce the potential health benefits of the oil. So if you're going to buy the expensive oils like the extra virgin olive oil one, you're going to buy it in a colored bottle or a can or whatever the case may be, and you're going to store it in a kind of like a dark place to prevent it from being oxidized by the light. But again, things like olive oil and coconut oil, they're high price point. So if you want to use an oil, it makes sense to probably just get a basic vegetable oil. And the key thing here I often tell people is that you want to discard it after a single use. And by discarding it after a single use, you reduce the probability of consuming excess levels of trans fats.
Okay, thank you for that, Brian. Sharon Gibbons is asking, is it okay to eat vegetables like okra, collard green, and mustard raw?
Yeah, I mean, again, it really comes down to a person's taste preference, but having things like okras and I guess if they're sliced thinly, yeah, I mean, having things like the mustard greens or the collard greens in salads. I mean, yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, of course, the key thing is you want to wash them properly, so you're going to prepare them properly. I think that's the key thing. But I have no issues in terms of persons using those things. That's fine.
Okay, another question that I see posed is there or can there be an ongoing program for children to learn about and adopt the use of healthy foods into their lifestyle in conjunction with their parents?
Okay. I think they should be, right. I think that's important. I think we normally have a nutrition summer camp every year. We didn't have it last year. I'm not sure why, but we didn't have it last year. But by children participating in like nutrition themed camps, it can make a huge difference. And the difference is that it actually gives them a deeper appreciation in terms of one, where their food comes from, and it allows them to kind of explore and taste and try different foods. And by introducing different foods to children, especially when they're very young, it makes a huge difference. And again, I mean, I would encourage parents to cook with their children as well too, at least to talk about it. And by doing that, it kind of creates kind of like a relationship with food and nutrition. So we do have a summer camp, and there are other nutrition team summer camps. And I think by getting your child or your ward into one of these camps, it can definitely help. And you know what I mean? But again, the key thing here, as I often tell people too, is about modeling healthy behaviors at home. And that is key as well too. Because I mean, you can't expect to be, consuming primarily fast foods at home. And then when you get to school or get to camp and the camp is themed around consuming healthy foods, you can't expect then miraculously the children begin to eat or want these specific foods.
Okay, Ashley Stout wanted to know which is preferable, canned peas and beans or the dry version of the product.
Again, it really comes down to your time for preparation. Canned stuff generally contains a bit more sodium than the dried stuff. So for me, the key thing here is that but they're more convenient, right? So what can you do? You can rinse the canned peas and beans, and that's fine, and drain them and rinse them. Or if you have the time to actually cook the dried stuff, I mean that's fine as well too. But just based on ease of use, it's maybe more practical for the individual to actually buy the can and rinse them prior to use. But again, they're both going to be very healthy.
Okay, I hope that answered the question. Kathy Ann Patrick wants you to speak about washing of fruit and how effective is using baking soda and vinegar to wash fruits and vegetables.
I think for me, again, washing fruit thoroughly is important. You will remove any kind of pesticide residues first things first, any other things like dirt, etc., from the fruits. I think using things like baking soda and vinegar, as long as you wash fruit thoroughly, even if you just use plain water, it definitely will be very effective. I don't think using baking soda or vinegar makes a huge difference compared to using clean water. I think when you talk about things like I would say the delicate fruit like the raspberries and the things like the blackberries, etc., strawberries too. Once these fruits are dried properly, they tend to have a longer shelf life. So regardless of whether it's vinegar or baking soda or just plain water, the shelf life is extended once these fruits and veg are dried properly. And let's say let's say you're a person who actually prepares like potatoes, whether it be sweet potatoes or English potatoes, and you actually eat the skin. A simple way to do it would be to get some dishwashing liquid, and you get like a kind of like a scouring pad, and you kind of scrub it to remove the excess dirt, etc. And that's an option as well too.
Another question that I see posted is how long should prepared foods be kept in the freezer before eating?
Mm. I think it's an individual thing. I think the key thing here, the person actually keeps the food in the freezer, not the fridge. Because if you keep the food in the fridge at roughly temperature of 4, bacteria can still grow though slowly. But again, once it's frozen, the shelf life is extended significantly. Um, I mean, when you get into like the 3 months and that kind of thing, the taste may be a bit off. But as long as you use it within a month or 6 weeks or even 2 months, I think that's fine.
I hope that answered your question, Beverly. Sheila Blanche is asking you to address these serving sizes. So they know you had noted that we here in Barbados have huge serving sizes.
Yeah, I think the typical Barbadian consumes way too much, especially the starch and the protein component of the meal. And things like fruits, especially vegetables, they tend to be smaller. And I mean, it makes sense too, because I think let's say a person goes to buy food, for instance, the person selling the food, because the things that the vegetables are, the price point for the vegetables is going to be definitely higher. So when a person actually is serving, they're going to give you a limited amounts of vegetables, but the vast majority of food on the plate is going to be starch, which is not as nutritious as vegetables. Um, in terms of things like meat, fish, and poultry, anything between 4 to 6 ounces tends to be ideal. And the example would be, half of the palm of your hand. So we talk about the part by your fingers. That would tend to be an appropriate serving size. People often use the a pack of playing cards. That can be considered an appropriate serving size of high protein food. Half cup, yeah. And in terms of the carbohydrate component of the meal, I would normally tell people, 1 to 1.5 large serving spoons, or maybe like a cup or 3/4 of a cup would be an appropriate serving size for the staple. In terms of things like vegetables now, you're often told that kind of like two fists tend to be an appropriate serving size of vegetables. And we require roughly about maybe at least 3 servings of things like vegetables and 2 servings of fruit a day. And a serving of vegetables, again, it could be, or 3 servings of vegetables could be, just be your two fists. So it's not necessarily a whole lot, or not as much as we think.
Right. I see another question posted. Speed. Bread was included in the slides you presented earlier, but doesn't it cause bloating of the stomach? What can you say about allergies or sinus issues generated from whole wheat foods?
Well, bread is only going to cause bloating if a person has some kind of gluten intolerance, right? And again, gluten intolerance is a spectrum. Some people are very intolerant, some people are mildly intolerant, and then most people kind of exist here. But gluten intolerance is not very typical in Black populations. So sometimes when you go to the supermarket, you see gluten-free pasta or gluten-free pasta especially, or any kind of flour-based product. They have gluten-free varieties which are very expensive. But if you are not gluten intolerant, there's no real need for you to buy gluten-free products, right? So I think that is important as well too. Things like whole wheat bread, or even to some extent biscuits, causing some kind of gastrointestinal discomfort. If a person has like an intolerance, or let's say like celiac disease, for instance, where they can't process gluten, definitely going to feel some kind of bloating. But under normal circumstances, the average person, I think the issue is not necessarily that the bread may cause bloating, but they may actually be eating too many slices of bread. So a person may eat 4 or 5 slices of bread, which are definitely way too many, right?
Okay, I hope that answered the question. There's another one I see. Using general local food options or sources. What examples of good meal planning for a week can you provide?
No, that's a big question. Um, You're planning for a week. That's a big question. I mean, that's a question I would probably try to entertain, I guess, away from this forum. But in terms of typical breakfast, for instance, a typical breakfast for a person could be, again, breakfast doesn't necessarily have to be what we as Barbadians think are traditional breakfast options. A breakfast could be a cup of porridge, maybe with some ground linseed to add some fiber and some other nutrients to it, preferably some low-fat milk. Again, limited amounts of sugar, if any at all. You could maybe have like a hard-boiled egg with that. A hard-boiled egg with that could be a good option as well too. Again, to give it some protein. Breakfast could also be something like a tuna sandwich or like a sardine sandwich with some vegetables added into the sandwich. Again, that's an option as well too. And again, lunch could be something we typically consume. Lunch could be whether it be rice or some kind of pasta dish. It could be some kind of meat, fish, or poultry. Anything around 4 ounces would be good. And dinner could be something light, preferably depending on the person. It could be something which is lighter on the carbohydrates compared to the lunch. But in terms of meal planning, I would encourage the person to reach out to the polyclinic in their catchment, and they could also speak to a community nutrition officer there, and they can definitely get some more insight in terms of how best to plan a meal for 7 days.
Paula Chandler is saying she made a comment that in some instances, buying in bulk is easier said than done because you may not have the space.
Mm.
Certain foods are very perishable and spoil easily. So how do we effectively buy in bulk then?
Um, no, I did try to get more space, right? But I think if you have limited storage capacity, I think buying in bulk, unless you're going to buy in bulk with a group of friends or family, it doesn't really make sense because you just end up with lots of spoilage or wastage. So you may opt not to buy the perishable foods in bulk, but the non-perishable things like the peas and the beans and the stuff which may come in a can and the dried stuff, and I think you may opt to buy those in bulk. And again, because you're buying in bulk, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to one of the um one of the big box stores purchasing these things on your own. Again, you could buy in bulk with friends and family. I mean, you could even buy in bulk with work colleagues as well too, and you would divide them accordingly. So buying in bulk can be useful, whether you buy and you freeze or whether you buy and you use dried stuff. That helps as well too.
Okay, I am scanning the chat to see if I've missed any of the questions that were being posted as we went along.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that I see posted by Miss Speed is how do you know how much vitamins or supplements to take and when?
I think the question of supplements, I think it's a kind of as I think the manufacturers, I think they have pretty much kind of fooled us into thinking that we need to take some kind of vitamin supplement for day-to-day living. I mean, there are cases where persons may have specific issues and let's say their hemoglobin levels may be low, their iron levels may be low, and they may get like specific supplementation, right? But the average person, as long as they have a variety of foods, they're definitely going to get pretty much all the vitamins and minerals they require. So this idea of taking a supplement to kind of be healthy, I think is kind of like a manifestation of what the marketers have done over the years. And like for instance, like especially during COVID, But even now, even before, but especially during COVID, I think when people they go and purchase these vitamin C tablets, these effervescent tablets dissolve in water and they drink it, and it contains anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 grams of milligrams of vitamin C. And that often represents sometimes 10 to 15 times the amount that a person may actually need. Therefore, vitamin C is water soluble. So therefore, when people take in this high dose of vitamin C, the body's not going to absorb all of it. It's probably just absorb a very small amount, and the rest is going to be passed out as urine. And that's the key thing. You're not necessarily getting what you think you're getting. So I've advised patients in the past to take your same, if you're going to buy it, take the same vitamin C tab, cut it into four, and have one quarter every day or even every other day, and generally that is good enough. But the key thing is that the vitamins or minerals in food are more biologically available than those which come in the supplement form. So if you're going to take a supplement, in most cases, the average person doesn't even need to take the supplement every single day. They can actually take the supplement every other day, So there's no real guarantee that if you take supplements, you're going to be healthier than anybody else. Are you going to be healthier in general?
Okay, and one final question for today was posted by Caroline Mason. I've been unsuccessful in getting a healthy meal plan from my local polyclinic. Is there somewhere I can source one?
That's kind of a loaded question, right? One, it depends on I can't answer which polyclinic it is, but generally when you reach out to your community nutrition officer, they're generally very keen to kind of address any specific dietary needs a person may have. I'm surprised that you were unsuccessful. But first thing to do is try again. I think that's important. And reach out to the nutrition professional at the polyclinic, or you could even contact the National Nutrition Center directly, and there my supervisor can actually put you on to the community nutrition officer at the polyclinic to kind of discuss what specific dietary issues that you have. So that's what I would do. Again, I'll reach out to the polyclinic again. If not, I'll reach out to the National Nutrition Center, and you can get more of a direct line to the community nutrition officer at the specific polyclinic. Because to my knowledge, I know all the polyclinics are manned. They're not, persons aren't there every day because officers now cover multiple clinics, So some persons may spend 2 days at one clinic and they may spend 3 days at another clinic, again, based on the size. But I think the key thing is that, I would say reach out to the person again.
Okay, Caroline, you know what you would need to do after today. And the final question, you were encouraging us to grow things at home. And Sharon Gibbons wanted to know where you got your white buckets from.
Well, those aren't me. Those aren't mine. First things first. Those aren't mine. First things first. I mean, you can get buckets from any kind of hardware store, any kind of store. I think these things are sold. I think there's this Crumbs Bakery in Eagle Hall. That's Eagle Hall. Yeah, Eagle Hall, and they were selling white buckets for $2. So which I thought was quite cheap. So there are options there. You can also get those blue plastic containers and grow stuff in them as well. Or you can just make some raised garden beds as well too. What I will say is never use old tires to grow anything that you're going to eat. Based on the correct term is volatile organic compounds which may get into the crops that way. So we're not going to use any kind of tire gardens anymore, especially for food, especially for stuff that we're going to eat.
Okay. We've come to the end of our webinar presentation for today. Please look in the chat for the link to our evaluation form. I want to thank you very much in advance for completing this form. The feedback is important to us as we seek to improve and enhance our webinar presentations. To Brian Payne of the National Nutrition Center, a very sincere and hearty thank you from the Learning and Development Directorate for facilitating the presentation today. I certainly feel more comfortable now in terms of how to undertake incorporating peas and legumes and beans to increase fiber intake for our meals. And it was certainly insightful to learn that we don't need to have meat on our plate each and every day. And I hope that the men who would have joined the presentation this morning or would have been encouraged in terms of their prostate health to embrace the benefits of using red-colored vegetables like tomatoes and red peppers. So to you, colleagues, thank you so much for joining as well. You were truly engaging participants. And we would want at this time to thank you very much. The webinar is recorded. I know one or two persons would have asked if the information would be available. If the recording would be available, yes, it's being recorded. So the recording will be shared, as I would have said at the beginning, on the Learning and Development's YouTube channel. So I want to say, have a great day, mid of your day. Thank you very much for joining, and take care, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.